Thanks again, everybody, for coming out tonight. Tonight, I'm going to discuss the Palatine heritage of John D. Rockefeller Sr. It's somewhat well known around here, really not that well known nationally. John D. Rockefeller Sr. himself was only mildly interested, I would say, in his ancestors here on the American continent. He was, in his time, he was the richest man in the United States. He was about, in 2019 dollars, he's about twice as wealthy as Jeff Bezos is now. Just for comparison, he and his brother co-founded Standard Oil, and that oil empire brought him a tremendous amount of wealth, in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. While he was born in the town of Richford out in the Finger Lakes region, and he grew to adulthood in Cleveland, Ohio, and later spent most of his life at mansions in Sleepy Hollow in Westchester County and down in Ormond Beach in Florida. His ancestry and the surname Rockefeller are both Palatine German in origin. Before I delve into the lives of the forebears who lived here in Germantown, I want to recount the story of how his family found their way out to his birthplace in Richford, New York, which is in Tioga County. So this is John D. Rockefeller Sr.'s grandfather, paternal grandfather, Godfrey Lewis Rockefeller. He's born here in Germantown, 1783. He's described in family accounts as something of a business failure. He tried his hand at many different things. His wife, Lucy Avery, is from a relatively well-to-do, somewhat patrician family from Great Barrington, Massachusetts. The Averys thought that Lucy had married below her station by marrying Godfrey. And, in my opinion, I think that whole angle is overplayed in the family lore. It is true, Godfrey and Lucy and their 10 children, they did move around quite a bit, which, somewhat indicative of the fact that he found it hard to make a living. One of the places they wind up in is Great Barrington, Lucy's hometown. I believe Godfrey is a constable for a time in Great Barrington. They also end up in a little hamlet called Grangerville in what's now Saratoga County. A lot of times in the records that gets shortened to Granger, and then people get confused with a town out in western New York called far western New York called Granger. But the Grangerville that Godfrey and Lucy and their children lived in for a time was just 100 miles up the Hudson, not even, in Saratoga County. In the 1830s, Godfrey and Lucy, they decide to move out to the area now known as Richford, New York. This is where some of the family lore, I think, obfuscates the truth. The family lore is that, Godfrey just couldn't make it here in the Hudson Valley in Germantown or Great Barrington or Grangerville. But in fact, the Avery family and the Pixley family, which is another family that Lucy Avery, Godfrey's wife, descended from, they owned quite a lot of land in what's now Tioga County and the environs. A lot of those surnames that she descended from are in the graveyards and well documented among the founders of Owego, New York. In Tioga County, it's a river town on the Susquehanna River. So a lot of those Massachusetts families that Lucy was descended from wound up with big tracts of land from what was called the Boston Purchase, which was a negotiated settlement between Massachusetts and New York after the Revolution, because they both thought that they owned all the way to the Pacific Ocean, so they had to negotiate a compromise. So there's Richford, New York. The pin is dropped right there. We've got the Susquehanna River here, going through Binghamton, Owego, the village I mentioned with the Pixleys and the Averys. Here's Cayuga Lake and Ithaca at the foot of Cayuga Lake. Unadilla here is on further up on the Susquehanna River. That was the original end of the Catskill Turnpike, also known as the Susquehanna Turnpike. If you're on the Catskill end, it's known as the Susquehanna Turnpike, and then on the other end, it's called the Catskill Turnpike, just the destination. And then the western extension of the Catskill Turnpike followed roughly Route 206 and 41, and then 206 again, and then went through Whitney Point, and then out Route 79 here as well, approximate path. One of the other, probably inaccurate family stories is that Godfrey Rockefeller wanted to get out all the way to Michigan. He is thought to have got to the top of a hill. This terrain here is just hill after hill after hill after hill. Supposedly got to the top of the hill that he settled near and said something to the effect of, "This is as close as we'll ever get to Michigan." And with a sigh, decided to settle down and create a farm at the bottom of that hill. That story is almost certainly false. All this land was divvied up as part of the Boston Purchase, and undoubtedly a Pixley or an Avery who had settled down here in Owego either gave or sold it to Lucy Avery herself. So this is a zoom in. This is a zoom in of Richford, New York. With the date is 1869 on this map. So this is after Godfrey Rockefeller's passed away. But Godfrey Rockefeller's farm was in the ballpark of here. This is called Rockefeller Road nowadays in the town of Richford. Almost all this land here is state forest nowadays. Pretty indicative of the harsh terrain. Like I said, small hills of about 1,500 to 2,000 feet tall, and really narrow valleys in between all those hills, and little creeks. This is a tributary of the Owego Creek, the west branch of the Owego Creek, which is right here. This is land that you really can't intensively farm. If you plow the soil a foot down, a rainstorm is going to come and all your soil is going to end up in the Owego Creek and thence into the Susquehanna River. So a lot of these farms were abandoned as early as the Civil War. A lot of the hilltops were just left as woodlots and never even attempted to be farmed. So Godfrey's farm is about here, or Frostgate. Frostgate's farm is here. School number 9 here. This was donated by John D. Rockefeller's father. There's this little piece of land here. John D. Rockefeller's, the house that he was born in is probably this one here with the name S.M. Dean affixed to it. This is right by that little feeder creek of the Owego Creek. The other thing of note here is these names. Rockefeller, there's, I think, 3 deckers on this map. And even the names that sound a little bit more New Englandy, like Blakeman, Griswold, Stanton. A lot of these people right on this immediate road here came from Columbia County, if you check the census data. The other important thing to point out here is South Harford, is Harford Mills, it's called today. Tiny little crossroads town that had a sawmill in this era. So this is the view from Michigan Hill, looking west. Michigan Hill, so-called because of that story about Godfrey getting to the top of this hill, exhaustedly saying, you know, this is as close to Michigan as we'll get. And that gives you an idea of the terrain. It's just hill after hill after hill, narrow valleys in between. This is the State Forest, Michigan Hill State Forest. This is a snowmobile trail / walking trail in the summertime. Yeah, the people out here, they're aware that this is John D. Rockefeller's birth site, despite the fact that the site itself is quite neglected, but you know, it does still exist, which is more than we can say for a lot of the Rockefeller sites here in Germantown. Okay, so this is postcard. This is purported to be a picture of the birthplace of John D. Rockefeller Sr. This was his father, William Avery Rockefeller, is thought to have built this on a piece of land that his father gave him. I'm not so sure. This may be Godfrey's house. The reason I say that, this looks to me like the crest of a hill. And I'll show you the actual birthplace site now. And this is kind of a depression in the land here. And you know, it's possible. I would say the foundation that's there in the ground now probably corresponds to a house about the size of half of this one. So this is the site here. This is Rockefeller's birthplace. I took this picture in late 2015, early 2016. Still pretty well intact. This house has been gone for at least 100 years. Now, there's foundation steps coming up here. The wall was in very good shape here for the most part. Overgrown with wild rose. And then the other curious thing, a lot of Rockefeller-related sites, family sites, there's a bunch of really tall Norway spruces, so about 100 years old. That's true of some of the Rockefeller sites here in Germantown as well. I don't know. I think that John D. Rockefeller Sr. may have had a thing for that particular tree and may have planted them near some of the sites associated with his family. And there's a picture of the birthplace site. Summer of 2019 was the last time I was out there. You can see the damage there. That looks to me like a snowmobile or a quad. Went flying into the depression left by the basement there. There's a lot of quadding and snowmobiling in the state forest. And that's the sign that goes with the birthplace site. Went up in 1980, and that's falling apart now as well. So this is William Avery Rockefeller. This is one of Godfrey's sons. This is the father of John D. Rockefeller Sr. William Avery Rockefeller is nicknamed Devil Bill. He's not very well remembered, and rightfully so. In that house I showed you, the birthplace site, he had his wife, Eliza Davison, and he also had called her a housekeeper, named Nancy Brown. And he fathered children by both of them while they were living there. William Avery Rockefeller's line of work was selling patent medicines. He would sell all kinds of elixirs and potions and kidney cures and all sorts of things that were sold before the FDA was created. He was a Lothario, a snake oil salesman, a con artist. He would even cheat his sons. I think he's reputed to say he cheated his sons out of whenever he could, just to keep them sharp. That's just not a good story. This guy, Eliza Davison, his wife, she was born up in Moravia, New York, and for a time, the family, William Avery Rockefeller and Eliza Davison, they move up to Moravia with young John D. Rockefeller Sr. They have to leave Moravia and move down right into the village of Owego. And the reason for that was William Avery Rockefeller was served with he was hit with a rape charge, and they had to move down to Owego. They lived in Owego for a few years, and then eventually move on out to Cleveland, Ohio. After moving his family out to Cleveland, Ohio, William Avery Rockefeller comes back to New York, to Nichols, New York, which is a little bit downstream of Owego on the Susquehanna River, and gets married to another woman without getting divorced from Eliza Davison, gets married to another woman, and just pops in occasionally in Cleveland to John D. Rockefeller Sr. and his brother, and the rest of the family. And then William Avery Rockefeller moves out further out west, assumes the name William Livingston, and I believe he lives to be 96 years old. And that false name that he assumed, perhaps to escape the rape charge, is what's on his gravestone. So that's Godfrey Lewis Rockefeller. That's William Avery's father, John D. Rockefeller Sr.'s grandfather. And this is Godfrey Rockefeller's tombstone and his wife, Lucy. This is a cemetery in Harford Mills, New York. It's in Cortland County. It's just across the border from Richford. It's probably the closest it's probably closer to their farm than the village of Richford is. I took this picture probably 5 years ago now. And as you can see, Lucy's headstone broken in half then. That's what I'm going to hit on tonight, and probably in almost all of these talks, is just how neglected some of these sites are. So Godfrey Rockefeller's parents, they were third cousins, meaning they were grandchildren of first cousins. Christina Rockefeller, Godfrey's mother, she's born here in Germantown. She's a descendant of Deal Rockefeller Sr. Deal Rockefeller Sr.'s cousin, Johann Peter Rockefeller, settled in Amwell, New Jersey, around the same time. One of Johann Peter's grandsons, William Rockefeller, in the family records, sometimes referred to as Jersey Bill. He marries his third cousin, Christina Rockefeller, from Germantown. So there's Peter Rockefeller, that's Jersey Bill's father. Johann Peter Rockefeller is Jersey Bill's grandfather. Deal Rockefeller came to East Camp in 1733, Johann Peter came to what's now Amwell, New Jersey, sometime between 1729 and 1733. And now, another family story that's probably inaccurate is that Johann Peter Rockefeller, he intended to come to East Camp. That's the family story. Intended to come to East Camp, but the ship got blown off course and landed in Philadelphia instead. And then he traveled up the Delaware River and began the journey overland to get to East Camp, what's now Germantown, but decided the farmland in central western New Jersey was so good that he just stayed there. The reason I think that's probably not accurate is there's a lot of Palatine German settlement there in central western New Jersey, not far from the Delaware River, and this goes back. This is kind of an underplayed theme in the Palatine story in general. The Palatines that came to New York in 1709 and 10, not all of them were healthy enough to participate in the naval stores projects here in East Camp and in West Camp. Some number of them stayed in Manhattan. And of that number, quite a few of them wound up settling, parts of Western New Jersey. And probably some of the Palatines who left East Camp and West Camp and went to the Schoharie, the Mohawk, and then down the Susquehanna to Topohawken, Pennsylvania, I'm sure merged into these New Jersey settlements in later years as well. Both of these Rockefeller cousins are what we call late Palatines, meaning they didn't come with the 1709-10 cohort. They were related undoubtedly to some of the settlers who came then and came in the decades after. So this is a monument that John D. Rockefeller Sr. erected in a graveyard in Amwell, New Jersey. This is not where Johann Peter Rockefeller and the other Rockefellers who lived there in Amwell are buried. That is on a farm that Johann Peter had. He had a family plot on his farm. The location of that, it's not well known. The graves are not there anymore. A local historian from that area could probably point out where it is. But again, the theme is neglect of some of these family sites. The other interesting thing, I said the settlement in western New Jersey of the Palatines here, it's definitely an overlooked theme. Some of the other Palatine connections, a lot of the Rockefellers were heavily involved in the Reformed Church there. A lot of them became Presbyterian churches in that area in the later 1800s and into the 1900s. But the Rockefellers in New Jersey, as well as here in East Camp, were always pretty heavily affiliated with the Reformed faith. The county that Amwell, New Jersey is in is called Hunterdon County, and it's named for Governor Robert Hunter, who, heavily involved in the Palatine project here in East Camp. He was also the colonial governor of New Jersey at the same time that he was the colonial governor of New York. And some of the nearby towns here, close to Amwell, New Jersey, there's a place called Paulin's Kill, which probably a play on the surname Pauli. D.L. Rockefeller from East Camp here, and Johann Peter Rockefeller, I believe was their grandmother. Her last name was Pauli. And so the name Paulinskill descends from that name. And the town of Oldwick, New Jersey, which is, I think maybe 15 or 20 miles from Amwell here, was originally called New Germantown. And, changed to Oldwick, New Jersey during World War I, when we were at war with Germany. Okay, so to circle back to Germantown, to East Camp here. I mentioned Christina Rockefeller a few slides ago. She was born here at the Rockefeller home on Route 8. The daughter of Simeon and Anna Rockefeller. There's a house there a few paint jobs ago. This is another Rockefeller family site with enormous Norway spruce trees near it. This is, to my knowledge, this is the part of this house is the second oldest house here in Germantown that still stands. The oldest parts of the parsonage, the original Reformed Church parsonage here, date to 1746. The stone part of this building is thought to date about 1755. And then most of the rest of this house, I believe the date is 1808, this house acquired this look. This was where the first documented town board meeting was held. This was a very active tavern at that time. And so that date, 1755, that just 4 years after Simeon's father, D.L. Sr., erected a grist and sawmill on the little creek that runs just north of Main Street. D.L. Rockefeller acquired title to 8 tracts of land on the 1740 Colden map. He got title to 8 of those lots. In 1741, acquires title from Hayner and Hagedorn, which were the trustees. And the trustee, once the land was distributed out to the Palatines officially, he acquired it directly from them. The 1751 date, in that year, D.L. Rockefeller acquired the piece of land that he needed to erect this mill, the site where the mill was. He acquired from a man named Finkel, last name Finkel, in that year. So this is when D.L. eventually becomes a very wealthy man. He starts with those 8 lots, acquires the mill site in 1751. And then, by the time he dies in the late 1760s, he is said to have owned 10% of what was then Germantown, which was 6,000. The whole town is 6,000 acres. So he owned, approximately 600 acres of land here in Germantown, including a very, very lucrative mill site here. This is, a drawing, a likeness done of D.L. Rockefeller's homestead. This was somewhere in the ballpark of the bank, possibly. This is the corner of 9G and Main Street, or possibly somewhere just a little further north it could have been anywhere in that general ballpark. This house, similar sort of hangover porch to the Simon Rockefeller homestead, and this house came down in 1848. Okay, and just this is a zoom-in shot of the 1740 Colden map. These are all the original lots in Germantown as they were dispersed to the settlers who wished to stay after 1740. Some of the lot numbers that Deal Senior acquires are a lot of these, 183, 188, this one here. For reference, this down here, this is the intersection of East Camp and Woods Road. This is about where Main Street comes out onto 9G now. You see there's a little bit of a road, but no road going all the way down the path of Lower Main Street now. This is Maple Avenue. This is the parsonage that still stands. Sharp's Landing Road. So Deal's primary lands here are in 1741 acquires 201, 200. This is, I believe, the mill site here. And that lot that I mentioned he acquired from Finkel in 1751, that was lot number 202. This is probably about where the new Dollar General is now. I've thrown around theories about why did Deal need this lot? Why did he not put the mill there in 1741? He's got the spot where the mill was. We think it may not have been the easiest access here. Like he may have had an easier time accessing this lot through this here. It might have been a little bit more gradual approach to the Little Creek. But this, most of Deal's holdings are here in the 180s and the low 200s. And just to skip ahead a little bit, this is the old Mountain View house. The original use of this building was the Riverside Seminary. This is one of Deal Rockefeller's descendants. Built this for use as a private school. Only lasted a few years as a school, and then for many years it was a very well attended hotel. The Rockefeller Family Association, genealogical association, met here in the early 1900s. This is right at the corner. This is Lower Main Street now. 9G is up here. We're looking north. There's some semblance of a sidewalk here. This hotel burned down in 1910. But rewind a little bit. Deal Rockefeller Senior, like I said, he wound up with 10%. Of owning 10% of Germantown at the time of his death. He had many descendants here. It's hard to keep them all straight. One of his descendants, a man named Philip Rockefeller, operated a tavern, just slightly north of here on what's now 9G. That was another place where town board meetings were held into the 1800s. He said, later into the 1800s, a man named Isaac P. Rockefeller establishes a store down at the foot of, down towards the end of Funk Road. So many of his descendants also settled most of the lots on Main Street. Probably a majority of the lots on Main Street are Rockefellers, in the 1800s. It was said, only half jokingly, if you go up to anybody and introduce yourself and say, "Hello, Mr. Rockefeller," or Mr. Hover, or Mr. Lasher, you're going to be correct. One of those three is going to be the correct way of addressing somebody. In Franklin Ellis's history, refers to the Rockefeller neighborhood, and he's talking about Main Street, the village now, and he quips that the whole town may as well be called the Rockefeller neighborhood, and again, that's only half in jest. Now this here. This will tie into the next town talk we do next month. This is Sharp's Landing Road, and this is Sharp's Landing Extension. This little triangle of land here amounts to about 9/10 of an acre. It's owned by the town of Germantown, and this is where the original Reformed Church cemetery was. It took over 100 years worth of burials. The Reformed Church and the Reformed and Lutheran churches were both down here on Sharp's Landing, or near Sharp's Landing Road. This is the old graveyard, and the Reformed Church didn't move up to Cemetery Hill until 1814. So from 1710 or so, and until the early decades of the 1800s, this is one of the three primary burial sites here in town. This is where most of those early Rockefellers, the original Rockefellers, D.L. Sr. and his sons. I'm not getting too much into some of the stories of his sons and grandsons because I think that they deserve their own presentation in their own right. But many of them served in the American Revolution and in the War of 1812. Many of them served conspicuously well at the Battle of Saratoga as part of the Albany County Militia. And there's a monument at the Saratoga battlefield with Captain D.L. Rockefeller, D.L. being D.L. Jr. But those early generations of Rockefellers, like I said, they're very, very affiliated with the Reformed faith. You'll notice that with some of the old families. For example, the Lashers were very much affiliated with the Lutheran faith in the early generations, and even on 100 years later. The Rockefellers were very much associated with the Reformed faith. For that reason, I think it's pretty safe assumption that D.L. Rockefeller Sr. and many of his children and grandchildren are buried here at the original Reformed cemetery. And that's a view of the same spot. Walt Miller took this picture sometime in the 1920s or 30s. And this was all that was left of that cemetery at that time, just a couple of rows of stones about to go over. There's my contact information for the history department, my email, the phone number here at the parsonage. And Katrina, do you want to get started on Q&A?
Absolutely. So if you have any additional questions, please enter into the chat. And I'm going to open this up here. I did see one come through. Okay, we had a question. What happened to the Rockefeller Gristmill sign that was on Main Street and Young American Road near the former Key Bank?
Good question. I'm going to share my screen again to show it again. Okay. So short answer is what happened was rust. You can see here it was welded together, repaired, put back up. What's the tag on that? 2002. It fell down not very many years after that. This weld broke and it flopped over, and it wound up here at the history department. We keep it here. We really should. It's on my to-do list to replace that sign and maybe give some more detail than that original sign gave. And it's definitely on my to-do list. But the short story is it rusted out and flopped over, but it does still exist here.
Another question just popped up. This is from Tara Barberi, and she wanted to know, was everyone moved from the cemetery in Sharp's Landing, or is it just unmarked?
It's just unmarked. All the stones are either in the mud or removed, or in the case of the Lutheran cemetery, not too far away, a lot of them got used in the foundation of an outbuilding. Got knocked over, but I'll get into that next month. The burials are still there. But the stones are not, and it's not marked at all. That's another thing on my to-do list as town historian.
We have another question. Were there any Germantown families that were most connected to the Rockefellers?
The Sharps, you could say virtually all of them. Lashers married, various branches of Lashers married in Deniger. There's a family connection with Deniger pretty early on. Also married into the Sharp family early on. That's another family. There's a lot of Sharp burials at that Reformed cemetery that I showed. So they're pretty intertwined there. You get a few generations out, the Rockefellers intermarried with each other quite a lot too. Once you got out to the second and third generation, it was pretty common for second, third, fourth cousin Rockefellers to marry each other in the early 1900s.
So those are all the questions for right now, but definitely enter some additional information in if you had to. I would have to just confirm that if you wanted to ask a question directly, if you want to try to unmute yourself to do that too, it's a great opportunity as well.
Katrina, I see that Bruce asked, are there still Rockefellers in the area? And,
thank you.
There are some folks with the surname Rockefeller who are still here. And there's even more who have lineage, Rockefeller lineage, but not necessarily the surname. But there's plenty of both.
G.H. Rockefeller Jr. or G.H. Rockefeller.
What about G.H. Who was the captain?
Yeah.
I hear Captain P.W. Rockefeller.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a Lower Main Street guy. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of information off the top of my head about him, but yeah, he had a house down on Lower Main Street. The Rockefellers had a dock, in the decades after Deal built the Gristmill on the creek. One of his sons or grandsons established a dock at it was right about where Young America Road kind of comes down to the railroad tracks, or close. It doesn't come all the way down now, but it came close. Pretty much right about there is where the Rockefeller dock was. It's not on the 1798 Wigram map, but it is mentioned in Franklin Ellis's history in the road districts section, the 1808, mentions Philip Rockefeller, which could be a son or various grandsons of Deal Rockefeller, had a dock at the foot of Young America Road.
We have a checkbook from the Rockefeller family at the Central House Hotel. And I kind of wanted to know a little more about the history of the Rockefellers from the hotel standpoint, and if it was always a hotel when it started.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I mean, I didn't, that could be a whole nother presentation, the later Rockefellers and the development of Main Street in general. Yeah, I mean, I haven't dug too much into the history of the Central House. Yeah, but as far as I know, it was a hotel and tavern, right from the get-go. That was another site where town board meetings were held. They were held pretty much wherever alcohol was flowing. That's where you had a town board meeting in those days.
Exactly.
We had two more questions pop in. Was Deal Rockefeller Sr. the third great-grandfather of John D. Rockefeller?
Okay. I tried to keep it. I didn't want to beat people over the head too much with family trees on the slideshow. So it goes Deal Sr., his son Simon, who builds the Rockefeller home on Route 8. The Simon and Anna have Christina. Christina's, one of her sons is Godfrey Rockefeller, the grandfather of John D. Rockefeller Sr. His son is William Avery Rockefeller. His son is John D. Rockefeller Sr. So we've got son, grandson, and great, 2 times great, 3 times great. Deal Sr. was the 3 times great grandfather of John D. Rockefeller Sr.
Unmute myself. So for how long did the Rockefellers dominate the ownership of Germantown? Just a Deal generation?
The Rockefellers are very, very heavily involved in Germantown. Well, into the 20th century, certainly. It's you're literally just tripping over Rockefellers in the late 1700s and into all of the 1800s. And then there's various branches of the family. They're very, very fruitful family, all the branches of them. They had very large reunions here in Germantown in the early 20th century. And so, the short answer to that is into the early 20th century.
And then we had a question, why do you think the graves were just left to go to waste?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what the exact answer is in the case of the Reformed Cemetery. I do know quite a bit of the story for the Lutheran Cemetery, which I'll talk about next month. I think the Rockefeller family in general kind of neglect their family. The the rich ones, the descendants of John D. Rockefeller Sr. I think that they like I said, there's just one neglected historic site after another related to this family. And, I think that to some extent, the family is kind of embarrassed about the whole Devil Bill story, where he's got his wife and kids and his mistress and kids, and then he's got another wife, and then he, living under an assumed name. And, I think that, they want to distance themselves a little bit from that story. In Ron Chernow's biography of John D. Rockefeller Sr., he probably contributed a little bit to that myth that Godfrey Rockefeller is just a ne'er-do-well, couldn't get out of his own way. I believe he referred to the Rockefellers in general as a hard-drinking hillbilly clan. But, that may have been the case with some of them who had moved to Richford, but clearly not the case for the Rockefellers who stayed here in Germany, for D.L. Rockefeller Sr. himself, and even Johann Peter in New Jersey. Almost all of them very successful farmers, businessmen, millwrights. It's hard to categorize the entire family before John D. Rockefeller Sr. as just, in Chernow's words, a hard-drinking hillbilly clan.
Jesus Christ.
I know the Rockefeller Family Foundation has been approached in the past about fixing up some of these sites and preserving them. I mean, just in the 5 years in between my visits to John D. Rockefeller Sr.'s birthplace, that foundation was ramrod straight. You could almost build a reproduction on it. The foundation walls were still so straight, and had a substantial cave in just 5 years later. From what I've heard from people is they're just not overly interested in preserving a lot of these sites associated with the early branches of their families.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, I'm doing fine. The relationship between the Rockefellers' early, middle, and late, and the earlier power centers of Livingston's, etc.
Yeah.
From your presentation, they were probably not particularly closely connected, but just wonder.
No, I mean, the Livingstons, I know they were not pleased that they wound up having to give title in 1740 to the Palatines, who stayed on the manor and acquired title to the 6,000 acres. I don't know of any later connections between the Rockefellers and Livingstons. I do know that William Avery Rockefeller was certainly shooting for some association with the Livingstons when his assumed name was William Livingston, to try to hide from the authorities or hide from one of his two wives or whatever he was hiding from. His assumed name was Livingston, one letter off from Livingston. So.
I have a question for you, just in response to the sites, or not maintaining the sites. What would be your top sites in Germantown that would be opportunities for the Rockefellers to bring up to some sort of history level?
Well, D.L. Rockefeller's mill site I think we really missed an opportunity when the Dollar General was constructed. We missed an opportunity to do some serious archaeology on that property because Deal was definitely active on that property, whether his house was on that lot or if he had outbuildings, or that's definitely an old piece of land that had a lot of activity from 1741 on.
You're saying there was commercial activity that maybe the mill was operating out of there, so it's still commercial. It's now.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's just a different form. So that's one site. The other big site is that Reformed Cemetery on Sharp's Landing Road. The town owns it. We really need to get some sort of marker there, and also for the Lutheran Cemetery. But I'll get into more of that next month. The Rockefeller home itself is pretty well maintained private home. I would say, and then, some sort of historic sign down at the bottom of Young America or somewhere on Lower Main Street to signify that dock that one of the Philip Rockefellers built sometime in the very late 1700s or early 1800s. That's really the other,
they need some markers.
the other really prominent site that people should know about.
How many markers do you think?
What's that?
Sounds like there could be a couple markers,
Oh yeah.
there's building left on it. How many markers?
As he said, you could mark up the whole town because they owned most of all of it.
Well, yeah. Deal Senior owned 10% of the 6,000 acres at his death. There's a bunch of other, not quite as notable, but notable sites up and down Main Street in the village that belong to Rockefeller descendants, Deal Rockefeller's descendants.
What happened to the mill building? Did that just get demolished at some point?
Yeah, I assume a flood. Probably, that's usually what happens with mills if they're not maintained. That'd be another great site to do some archaeology at as well.
Where is that on Mill Road?
No, so the Deal's Mill, there's a little creek that runs, it's now underneath the school parking lot. It kind of runs along Main Street there in the village across from the school. That goes under 9G, and then it's kind of, it runs between the Sunoco station and the empty bank building. And then as you go down Lower Main Street off of 9G, it's just to the north. There's a ravine with a small creek, and most of the time there's not much water in it at all.
Where was the mill? Where was it exactly?
Okay, so don't know exact site. It was probably from 9G going down the creek itself, probably a few hundred feet. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I live on the creek, and I think there are two sites on it.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, because of the way that the mill would have been built, had the cousin or the brother who was in New Jersey been a mill builder, and do they know anything about the type of mill it was?
Well, the Rockefellers in the Palatine, in what's now Germany, they were known as lumbermen, as millwrights. So they knew that was kind of their trade there. I don't know so much about operating mills specifically, but I mean that was their specialty in the old world, was sawing lumber and the carpentry. Well,
there's in my observation, there's the possibility that these weren't overshot mills. They were mills that were at the bottom of a penstock of sorts,
Okay.
and that they were using this. It was a kind of a small water source that they used, more efficiently because of this new technique.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of documentation. I think archaeology is probably the only way to really tell us any of the specifics of Deal's mill there on Lower Main.
Do they have records of the businesses in town and what percentage of the business that was? Like, was it a mill town at that, or did a lot of towns have mills and it wouldn't have been?
Well, I mean, in that era, there's various agriculture, grapes, apples, all kinds of fruit. Lumber is a big business there in the early days when the initial houses are being built. There are record books. It's hard to really give you a percentage, what percentage each business was. But, there's old books with transactions of sales. And, if you really wanted to crunch the numbers, you could probably come up with a percentage of each business. But.
Martin had a suggestion about let's make a walkable Rockefeller Trail in Germantown.
I agree. Yeah, let's do it.
That would be so great. Like there could be a bikeable one too.
True, with the new bike, yeah, that works with the new bike paths and stuff. We'll have to work on that, Tom.
Oh yeah, we already are.
Awesome. Do we have any other great questions before we head out for the night? And that way everybody can go shovel their driveways.
Are you all done with the archaeology at the Palatine, the history department personage site?
No, that project is ongoing. It'll be ongoing for quite some years to come.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Excellent. That's all I have. Thank you so much for doing doing all the work and doing all that.
Of course. Yeah, thanks so much for coming out.
We appreciate it.
And don't forget, next month, I just put it in the chat as well, on March 18th at 6:30, the Lost Graveyard Talks of Germantown as well. So there's a lot of questions that popped up for tonight that will then continue for next month.
We should do that one in October. Halloween.
That'll be a great walking trail. I love going to towns and doing the history tours, and especially the walking ones. So maybe that's something else we can contribute.
No, it's true. It's a great way to tour a town. You do a food tour and you do a history tour, and we definitely could do that here.
I agree.
I can say Tom's been talking about getting the cemetery tours going for a while. It's something that's on his agenda that I think would be really exciting.
Right. Mm-hmm. And most of the information you had gotten was from just the archives of the Rockefeller family, or did you get most of that information? Where'd you get most of your information, Tom?
Oh, various sources. Yeah, I don't have the bibliography in front of me, but yeah, I mean there's several volumes of the Rockefeller Association, family genealogies. That's kind of like your go-to source if you're looking into ancestors, who were associated with the Rockefeller family. That's probably going to be your first stop if you want more information.
Well, the school actually did a beautiful presentation on the Rockefeller family. It was done by Stephen Rockefeller Jr., and they did a really, really in-depth one with pictures and memorabilia and things of that sort. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really, really big topic. You can go off in any direction you want, really, because it's such a big family.
Sure. Well, thank you. I think everybody can shovel snow.
All right. Thank you. Anything?
So yeah, no new questions in the chat. So if everyone's all set, we just thank you, Tom, once again for the history department and some additional education for us here in Germantown. We appreciate it. And we will see everybody next month.
Thank you for hosting.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime.
Yeah.
Much.
We appreciate you all.
Good night.
Thank you.